we just can't assume the same things. So therefore, I try not to be easy on myself with my writing. I don't like to put in a lazy line knowing that everybody's going to know what I mean.
Hello. Welcome to Worth Quoting. I am Mary Sue Koeppel, the editor of Calliope, published by FCCJ. And with me today is a very special guest. Her name is Martha M. Vertreace, and she is a published poet of many, many books, 6 in fact. Let me tell you a little bit about Martha. Martha was born in Washington, D.C., and is now Associate Professor of English and the poet in residence at Kennedy King College in Chicago. I will name just a few of her books for you. Second House from the Corner, Under a Cat's Eye Moon, Oracle Bones, Light Caught Bending, and this is a book which is going to be published out of Scotland sometime in the spring, I guess, and Cinnabar, which was just published in 1995 and won the chapbook contest from Flume Press. Martha has won many awards, including an NEA fellowship, which is a wonderful compliment to you, 4 Arts Council Literary Awards from the state, and her list of awards goes on, but I do want to mention in particular that she was in residency in Ireland and also won a residency in Scotland, and these are special, special accomplishments. But to give you, our listeners, just a feel for Martha Vertreace's poetry, she is going to begin by reading one of my favorite poems, and it is called
My Uncle Speaks of Bees.
Yes.
Over evening coffee, his black, mine with cream, my uncle speaks of bees honeycombing inner walls of his old house next door, wax replacing crumbling plaster like a fairy tale cabin in enchanted forest. He plots to hide their entrance with an inverted funnel, smoke them sleepy, then drain the honey for our table. I'd like that, I tell him, brushing his thick knuckles. He thinks I am his eldest, calls me daughter. I'd go with him, I say, in nets and scarves, braving swarms and stings. He thinks I'm only kidding, with soft city hands. Instead, he wants me to write a poem about them bees, child. Make it rhyme. I adore him, I tell him again. We can outfox anything if we move fast enough. He tells me again, or tells himself, how he built the new house 3 feet from the property line, brick by stone by slatted board, left the old house to varmints and critters, set sweet corn in the sedge where summer blackbirds roost, a roofed feeder in the mulberry for cardinals and mourning doves, then paneled the kitchen, laid rugs, linoleum, bathroom tiles, raised 3 children, then retired from the factory to hang Sears fans on every ceiling. Brittle bones of his stiff fingers close around his empty cup. My aunt reads his pale eyes, pours more without asking. He thinks I am 12, makes me clean my plate, for strength, he says, for fighting bees, and anything else, I tell him, and anything else, he says.
I love that last line, and anything else, because this leads us right into perhaps some of the things we want to talk about. And anything else, Martha, thank you for that reading.
Thank you.
When you do your writing, you are what we would call an extremely literate poet, and some of your poetry is the kind that one reads maybe 10 times before one gets all of the images and symbols that you're talking about. But this poem is a poem, I think, that was based upon family and based upon a real character within your family.
Yes.
Would you talk a bit to us about the source of your poems? Family being included, of course.
primarily write about family when all is said and done. And when I do, though, I treat them as characters, really, and I embellish sometimes. In this particular poem, I told the truth pretty much. It's about my uncle, who at that time was dying of bone cancer, and who had to face what that was going to mean, and so we were trying to encourage each other. That's why he says at the end that we need strength, and that together we can face anything that comes. But I like to write about other things, too, of course. My interests are very far-reaching and a little strange, I guess. I like the hard sciences, for example, and so I bring a lot of that into my poems. And I write about my friends sometimes.
Yes, I know. I sat with a thesaurus and a dictionary one time reading some of your poems, but that's not to scare off our listeners because one can read your poems on many different kinds of levels, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And your students respond,
they do.
I suspect, to a lot of the poems that you're reading. Tell us a little about what you mean by saying that your poems are biographical, or when one refers to biography in terms of writing.
Right. For me, I use the things in my own biography or autobiography or the things in other people's lives as points to begin, but I owe no allegiance to what really happened. And so if the poem moves in a different direction, I'll change the fact of it. I mean, I'll just do that. I do that out of respect for the person. I don't try to portray an ugly character or something like that, but I really don't believe that poetry is primarily autobiographical. I don't. I think that the stuff of one's life are like building blocks. Those are building blocks, and you use that. You change it.
Yeah. You were mentioning to me something about one of the poets that you worked with said that you came out of a male perspective.
Yes.
Would you talk about that, male meaning not female?
This was an older poet, and she felt that most women who were classically trained, as I have been, were taught to appreciate writing from a male perspective. In other words, what we value in poetry has been classically identified as being primarily male. I'm not quite sure I accept all of that, but I do know that many times I've been told that my work seems very masculine, and that has been told as a compliment, and I'm not quite sure it is, since nothing else about me is masculine.
Yeah,
Nothing.
What do you think they mean when they talk about your poetry as being masculine?
Right, I think it's a sexist comment, truly. I think that there's a tendency to assume that a woman can only write about certain things, and that's like tea kettles and breastfeeding, and if she writes about something else other than that, then suddenly she's in the masculine world. And because I write so much about the sciences in so many of the pieces, somehow that's masculine, as if a woman can't appreciate the sciences. That's why I think it's sexist.
You mentioned something once, too, about the way in which you write about love.
Yes, the same poet.
Oh, okay.
Yes. The same poet feels that traditionally the love object in poetry has been objectified, and that has been done because primarily love poems were written by men about women. And when we as women write love poems, if we also objectify the love object, if you will, then we are entering the masculine tradition and therefore are writing a masculine poem. Again, I'm not quite sure how much of that I can take. I think there may be truth to that at some point, but again, I think we can push that and break it.
Yeah. When you talk about objectifying the love object, could you talk about that just a little bit? What are you doing when you do that?
See, I'm not doing it. I don't think so.
I don't think you
I would think that what this particular poet would say is that the object of that love ceases to be human, but becomes simply a foil for the feelings of the writer. The person is simply there to receive all this emoting about whatever world, lifetime.
You don't do that.
No,
much.
I know.
Yeah.
But that's what I think she meant.
So you're really disagreeing with the whole analysis then that you would be writing out of a male perspective.
Yes, I don't think I do at all.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so at all. And I think that at different times in our lives we see people differently, but that's just called growth and development. It has nothing to do with whether or not I take a masculine perspective.
No, and I really resent the fact that people say that women can only write about certain kinds of subjects and can only do it in certain kinds of ways.
right.
Obviously, you break all those barriers. So
Right.
I just wanted to talk about the names that they apply to the breaking of the barriers. Martha, when we talk about objectifying the love object, do you write about love?
Oh, yes. Oh, sure. I think anybody does. I think that love poems may be the first kinds of poems most people try to write. And I don't think that you ever really lose the desire to do that, because hopefully you'll always love somebody. In love or love, whatever you want to, however you want to see that. Hopefully one will always love all one's life, and consequently you'll want to put that down on paper.
When I read your poems, though, and we haven't talked about this before, one of the things that comes to me is a great sense of poignant loss.
Yes.
Yes.
It's there. Oh, sure.
It's there.
I think because my father died when I was very young. And so once that happened, the notion that things were permanent was no longer part of my reality. It just wasn't there. And consequently, all through my work, you'll find that.
So many of the yous in your poem are these people or whatever it was that was lost.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, or bits of me that are gone.
Yeah.
It just depends on the poem.
Yeah. It strikes me as I'm reading through your poems that your father was very important to you and comes through in a lot of the poems, and that's where the family comes through. When you talk about your mother and you talk about writing about her in fixed forms, would you just comment on why you as a poet choose fixed forms sometimes?
The one form that I truly enjoy that is a fixed form is the sestina. You know, where there are 6 stanzas with a certain kind of repetition of the end word and then a final stanza of 3 lines. It's a very obsessive form, and it lends itself very well to dream poetry and to dream images and to kind of a meditation on things, and it moves like a spiral down to the very end, and I think I like it because of that movement. There's enough space in there that I can sort of rattle around, and I don't quite feel as confined. I've tried to write villanelles, it doesn't work. I've written terrible sonnets. So the villanelle seems to be the sestina is my... yeah.
You are going to read a sestina, are you not?
Yes. I could read one about my uncle, another uncle poem. It's called The Symbolism Man, just to set it up a little bit. What was it, maybe a year or two ago, they found, excuse me, a year or two ago they found buried in a mountain the body of a man who had died, thousands of years ago. Well, I was intrigued by that. I also knew that a friend of mine would write about it, and I felt the need to write quickly so that I would beat him to the punch. And I did beat him, actually. He said to me later on, "You've already done it." This is the poem. It's called The Symbolism Man. What came quickly, rising dark, sliding on blue ice, dream hawks in snow whose ghostly feathers covered him, haunched on flat stone, wings of his Stone Age god grown still when breath melted circles around thin lips, melted over hay-lined boots. Darkness fixed his mummified eyes on future alpine ages. The prehistorian said, be it cold, ice, or snow, examining the tattooed body on stone, he knew exactly what he would encounter. Discovering the trench where hunters sheltered when storms covered the valley, mountain climbers stared at his unmelted face. Searching for a copper vein in stone, he wrapped in fur as glacial dark shrouded him. His last act, to keep snow off his talismans, his boon to the present age, a pouch laden with tools of a man his age, flintstone knife and lighter, kindling covered in leather, quiver with pine staves to fend snow off arrowheads, larch or bone for swifts, melted pitch for putty, copper axe with maple shaft, dark birch bark case at his waist, stone torque, all in Zentral Museum, Mainz, where stones speak. I think of my uncle's farm, his aged specimens shelved in barn dust, darkened to cool 3 Hellman's mayonnaise jars, covered with cheesecloth. Yellowed liquid melted velvet off a star-nosed mole he trapped, when snow powdered his field, 2 garter snakes once snowbound, a wren. He lifted each as moonlight rattled the stone walk leading to his house, as if what melted in his canopic jars were the heart, guts of aged earth. My uncle, her high priest, covered with silence of celestial bones, of holy dark, as snow-covered redstarts fanning their tails. Melting dark resin, the alchemy of stunted fur ripened gold, the gray stone of his aged flesh.
Now, Martha, as I've heard that poem and read it to myself perhaps 10 times, each time I come to it, and as I said before, I'm hearing more of the specifics that you're putting in there, which means to me that you've read and reread those newspaper clippings
Yes.
to come up with all those
Yes.
details.
Yes.
You find the detail in fact,
Yes.
and then you take it and turn it into a symbol, it
That's
sounds
right,
like.
right.
Would you talk about that process?
I try to really fully understand the situation as it actually happened, because I want my details to be accurate. Once I wrote a poem and titled it Letter from, what did I call it? Letter from Provence, I believe. And I got a lovely letter from a French teacher who said that she loved the poem, except the city that I was talking about was not in Provence. And that taught me a lesson. It was called do your homework and be as accurate as you can. And so that's what I try to do. When there's something like that that fascinates me, some queer, quirky happening in science or whatever, I try to be as accurate as I can. And so the details I will take from the actual happening. And then I'll add to it all kinds of things.
Talk about that layering of this symbolism, would you please?
I'm not aware of it. I mean, I'm not aware of doing it. It's just that once it's done, people say, oh, you've layered the symbols. So I don't know how it happens. It's just that I keep working a piece until it seems finished. And
But you put more and more and more meaning into it,
Yes.
so the symbols go into the poem as you keep working on it, I suspect.
yes, one poet whose name I shall not mention called me a symbolholic once. I don't think I was madly amused by being referred to as that, but I could understand why he felt that way. I do work a lot with symbols, I guess, and when I've written something, I can stand back from it. I can see the symbols in it.
You said once that you write a poem and then you publish it and then it's left out to dry. Is that how you said it?
It's hung out to dry. It's sent out on its own to earn its living.
Yeah.
Once I've published a piece, I seldom go back to it except to readings or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't just sort of go home and read Martha Vertreace tonight, you know.
Well, some people keep revising and revising.
Oh, I don't do
You don't
that.
go back
I
to
don't
your
do
old
that.
works.
No.
You're always going on to
I will
something
go
fresh.
on, yes. Once it's published, especially if it's in a book, I tend to leave it alone.
So could you describe how you work, Martha, just a little bit? I know some people write on backs of envelopes and little pieces of paper. You don't do that.
No, I have specific notebooks that I write in. I like certain places to write, although I can really write anywhere. But you know, in the ideal world, I have certain places where I work.
You bought a house because you fell in love with a writing room.
I bought a co-op because of one room in it, and fortunately, all the rest are nice too. But this one room, I knew would be the writing room. I like certain kinds of things around, but I really can write anywhere. There are places where I go to write. There's a restaurant in my neighborhood where I go to write. The wait staff know not to bother me. They'll just refill the coffee very quietly, because if they speak to me, they'll jerk me back, and I'll jump out of the chair. I'll be so frightened. So, yeah.
You like to write in Ireland, don't you?
I do. Oh, yeah. Yes.
And how many times have you been to Ireland? 5 or 6?
6 times.
6 times
5
to
or 6
residencies
times.
in Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
and once to Scotland,
Yes.
or a couple times to
Mm-hmm.
Scotland. How does that affect your perspective on, as a writer?
Well, I think it has forced me to see, it has forced me not to take for granted anything that I say. Because in Ireland, although we speak a common language, nothing is quite the same, of course. It's a different country, there's a different culture, there's a different history, there are different people. And so there, when I read their work or when they read mine, we just can't assume the same things. And so therefore, I try not to be easy on myself with my writing. I don't like to put in a lazy line knowing that everybody's going to know what I mean, for example. I also think that the Irish writers, the major Irish writers, are very, very imagistic and very, very layered in their approach to writing, and I think I imitate that.
To change gears just a little bit, I suspect that being over in Ireland gives you a perspective on what's happening politically in the United States. And I don't find much in your work that's African American in terms of references. Would you talk about that just maybe a minute or so?
Well, when I talk about my relatives, I'm talking about things that are African American, and I guess I don't feel the need to, preach a political position. I wasn't brought up with one exactly, and it's kind of hard to sort of warp into that now. I grew up in Washington, D.C., but in a very strange city in some ways, because when I was growing up, we didn't have the vote. And so politically, you were children. I mean, you were disenfranchised.
It's an interesting way to say that.
Well, we were, you see, and you grew up in a setting where, granted, most of us were black, so you just didn't think about it. It wasn't in your conscious mind. You wouldn't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm black this morning, how lovely. It just wouldn't happen. And so in my work, therefore, I simply assume that to be the case, and I move on really to something else. The things that most affected me as a child were not race. They were familial. They were friendships and things like that. Common ties to the earth, those kinds of things. And that's what I keep going back to. I think if I had grown up somewhere else or had grown up in D.C. as it is now, I'd be much more political than my work would be than it is.
It seems to me that you write about the small epiphanies. You watch the rain, or you see a train, or you read something in the paper that triggers reflection. And it's almost that old quote of emotion reflected in tranquility, you know. I respond very well to that in your poetry. The quietness of it, the gentleness of it, the profundity, which is in much of what you write. I really think it's there. You were going to read to us...
would you like Riding in Rain, since you mentioned rain?
Oh, okay. I was thinking of the one about your mom, but that's okay. I think we...
Which one was that?
That's fine.
Okay.
The one about the...
Oh, Black Cameo.
Cameo.
I could do Black
Pointing at my neck as if I have a black cameo on. Please, would you read that one?
Black Cameo or
No,
Riding,
no.
Riding in Rain? All right. Riding in Rain. Light bulbs strung across the rail yard, brighten, then dim, stars in an overcast sky. Leaving the station, my train thunders past white barns soaked in persistent dark, which spills across acres of burdock. Purple florets sputter in soft drizzle. Black Angus stands still with the easy thrill of boredom, which knows the rumble underfoot for miles back, the whistle sounding off wine saps, whose 3 or 4 apples swell round enough to burst, fill earth with slow-eyed seed. A calf starts, muddy flanks shudder as cracks wobble through cellars bordering tracks which quiver with old news. Prairie wind splits bungalows. Near the culvert lined with flat stones, winter oaks sleep. Brown leaves curl into a baby's fist. Moonlight sieves red clouds, skates meadows of rainwater where your face floats from one field to the next. Scales storefronts wearing frontier trim of starred brick, Midwest, where all is right angle and plain. In twilight rain, we stood where the halved willow bricked into the wall, leaned into wind. Come, I said, place your cheek here, where wood knots like roots, where moss greens under your hand. I learned by heart the curves of your shoulders, stroked your hair, then turned away before I did something stupid. If my fingers trace your spine, map with slow moves the geography of your back, will you think rain blazing its cool trail down your herringbone tweed collar? You who know that earth is 2/3 water, that from the moon the sky is black, the stars always visible. At night, my train feeling its way home, rain shivers down the window pane. I dream you into yourself, Rousseau's gypsy who sleeps with one eye open on dry sand, beside his mandolin and empty vase, beside the knowing, wakeful lion who waits where stream echoes sky, as if nothing happened.
Yes. This has been a reading by Martha M. Vertreace. Thank you for joining us. This has been Worth Quoting, and I am Mary Sue Koeppel, editor of Calliope. Goodbye.